Welcome to the June 1st special City Council meeting. I am Jim Nash. I am the City Council President, and I will be presiding ever so briefly this evening, as we will soon be recessing to allow the City Council Committee on Finance to continue the public hearing on the mayor's proposed FY2023 budget. This hearing will be led by Councilor Maori, the Chair of Finance, as we hear tonight from two more city departments. As this is a special council meeting, we will not be setting aside time for public comment. However, we will soon be in a public hearing where all that wish to speak to the departmental budgets presented tonight will have a chance to share their thoughts. Public comment will be back on the agenda for our regularly scheduled city council meeting, which is tomorrow night. Before we proceed, I need to let everyone know that this meeting and all participating on Zoom will be audio and video recorded. I now call the City Council to order. Clerk Powers, can you please call the roll?
Councilor Elkins?
Here.
Councilor Foster?
Here.
Councilor Gore?
Yeah.
Councilor Jarrett?
Here.
Councilor Labarge?
Here.
Councilor Maori?
Here.
Councilor Moulton?
Here.
Councilor Nash?
Here.
Councilor Perry?
Here.
Thank you.
Excellent. Everybody's here. Now that we are convened, we will recess for Finance Committee to hold the public hearing on the FY 2023 budget. Councilor Maori, you have the floor.
Yes. So welcome to the June 1st Finance Committee's continuation of the public hearing on the city's budget. You are still being audio and video recorded. And Clerk Powers, may I have a roll call for Finance Committee?
Councilor Labarge?
Here.
Councilor Maori?
Here.
Councilor Moulton?
Here.
Councilor Nash?
Oh, unmute.
Can you not
Let me see if I can make you a host.
Oh, there we go. I'm here.
Oh, there you go.
I never
Okay.
left.
We have a quorum. I'm going to read the blurb here. The City Council Committee on Finance will hold a public hearing in accordance with the Charter of Northampton, Massachusetts, Article 7, Finance and Fiscal Procedures, Section 7-4, Action on the Operating Budget, a public hearing. The City Council Committee on Finance will consider the proposed FY 2023 budget and hear all persons who wish to be heard thereon. Clerk Powers, may I have a roll call to open the public hearing?
Councilor Maori?
Yes.
Councilor Moulton?
Yes.
Councilor Nash?
I wonder if he's not a co-host. Let me see.
Councilor Nash?
Well,
He's got his, he's muted.
yeah, I'm trying to see if he's not a co-host.
There I am.
Oh, there you are.
There he is.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And Councilor Labarge?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the public hearing is open. I'm just going to go over the format for any folks there in the public. The chat will only be used for technical questions and will only go to the hosts. Councilor Moulton, like last night, has generously offered to track questions from the public, and we'll periodically stop and address questions. Folks can, what will happen is that each department head will have a presentation. We'll then open the floor to councilors for questions and comments, and then open it to the public for questions and comments. And you may ask a second question or make a second comment, but I'll go through the queue and then go back up until we've exhausted the list and anyone who would like to speak. We're asking folks to limit comments to 3 minutes. If you hear the timer go off, you can take that as a time to wrap up your comments. Ideally, the comments should be pertinent to the department that we are addressing at the moment. So tonight we have two the public schools and then the Northampton Police Department. So I think that's it. Yes, so with further ado, we have Northampton Public Schools here, Superintendent John Provost, to give us a presentation on the school budget. Welcome, Superintendent. Let's see. I'm trying to see him here. I saw him earlier. Oh, there you are. Yes.
Thank you very much. And in case I need to phone a friend during this presentation, would it be possible to allow Nick Bernier to unmute too? He's the school business administrator and he's on this call as well.
Yes, I'll make him a co-host.
Thank you very much. Oh, and it looks like the mayor too.
Oh, okay, yes. Whoops.
I'm just curious, why are these people not being able to unmute themselves? Because they were unmuted before.
But are they not
Oh, that's weird.
co-hosts?
I don't know. The mayor was speaking earlier, so
Let me see.
She needs to be a co-host, but when I updated this, like at the beginning of the meeting, I closed the waiting room and don't allow participants to unmute themselves and things like that.
Why?
okay, sounds good.
Okay, wait, hold on. Why am I not seeing where the usual co-host thing? Do you see it, Clerk Powers? Are you able to make them co-hosts?
I'm working on that right now.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
that's fine. That's fine. Well, Superintendent, why don't you start while we work on the on making Nick and the mayor co-host.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. And for counselors who I'm doing this process with for the first time, I want to thank you for welcoming me to your meeting tonight. I want to say hi and introduce myself. I am the superintendent of the Northampton Public Schools, and I have seen the version of the budget that was included in the city budget book. Obviously, what you have is sort of a synopsis of the overall budget that we have presented to the school committee and has been approved by the school committee. So let me just begin with the request itself. So originally, we had started with a budget request of $34,800,372, which was in line with the fiscal stability plan and the override vote that was taken a couple of years ago. Over the course of the budget development, I realized that wasn't going to be quite enough money for us to do what we needed to do. And I asked the mayor for additional funds. She was able to find an additional $109,000, which were added to that amount. So thank you, Mayor. That's sincerely appreciated. And then the school committee felt that additional funds would be required for the schools to be strong and solid. And so the appropriation that was approved by the school committee at their budget vote on the 14th of April was an additional $250,000 over that amount, bringing the amount requested to $35,159,372. That's an increase of $1,697,476 from the current budget, or 5.7%. You can see how that breaks out by cost center. If you look in your budget book at the page that immediately follows the overall budget request. And then you can see, after that, you can see what we call the FY23 budget by cost center. One piece that I want to point out, for those of you who are new to the process, is that even though the amount that I just requested was a little bit over $35 million, you'll see that when we report the FY3 budget by cost center, it's actually $42 million. That's because our budget includes a number of costs, about $7 million worth of costs that are known as indirects, They don't show up directly in as expenditures in the school budget, but they are part of the total cost of running the school. Probably the biggest piece of that is employee benefits and specifically health insurance. So those costs are covered in the city budget, but they are considered indirect charges to the school budget, and they contribute to net school spending, which is why you'll see the difference between the $35 million figure that I quoted earlier and the $42 million that appears when we look at the budget by cost center. After that, you'll see the changes. One of the things that I want to point out is this year, there were a number of changes to staffing that were approved after the budget was passed. There were 15.05 FTE positions altogether of those changes and increase. The vast majority of those were ESPs. I believe 13 of the 15 were ESPs added to support students who came to the schools presenting with some problems that maybe weren't there prior to COVID, or new students to the district who are presenting with some problems who we weren't aware of at the time that the budget was created. The personnel changes in the FY23 budget are a reduction of 5.94 FTEs. Again, the vast majority of those are, well, I shouldn't say the vast majority, about half of those are ESP positions. We also have reduced teacher position, some reduced central office positions. So we're requesting a reduction from the 15 additional positions that were added, but would still be up about 9 positions from what was approved in the FY22 budget. The other thing that's included in your packet are the COVID relief funds and our plan for spending COVID relief funds, not only this year, but the amounts that are left for the future years. So our budget this year is based on using about $2.3 million of COVID relief funds, which would leave us about $1.7 million of COVID relief funds for FY24. And then as noted in the packet that you have in front of you tonight, the full school budget is available on the district website. And this is your time to ask me questions and to get clarity on the school budget. So I think I'll stop with that and just make space for you to ask me anything you want to.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay, counselors, any questions or comments? Counselor Labarge.
Thank you. Yes, Superintendent Provost, is this increase enough? Even with the increase, our teachers are paid less than many surrounding communities, and that is for a fact. How do we retain our teachers? That's a question. I have heard of teachers leaving Northampton because they cannot make a lot of money here in Northampton versus making more on the outside. How do we fix this issue in the long run, Superintendent Provost? What is the process for figuring out how to pay our teachers a competitive salary?
Thank you very much for that question. Over the course of the past 2 collective bargaining agreement negotiations, there has been a real concerted effort to raise wages of Northampton City school employees. The goal in the last contract was to get our teachers to the median or above for our county, and that goal was reached. The goal in this negotiation has been to push that a little bit farther. One thing I'll say is that I think our retention has actually been good. You can look at staffing retention rates on the Department of Education website. This is for licensed staff only, so it's not the non-licensed staff. So it would be the superintendent, principals, and teachers. And our retention rate for 2022 is 90%. That compares to a statewide average of 86.8%. So we're doing better than average for teacher retention in the district. The area that I would say that I see the most challenging turnover in is actually our unlicensed staff, and particularly our ESPs. We do have a lot of turnover in that category. It's one of our lower paid categories. We've had a number of cases where staff have left before their first day of work. So that's the challenge. And our focus, I don't want to say too much about negotiations in the context of a budget hearing, but I can tell you that there's been a focus on trying to really direct as much funding as possible to some of the lower paid units, which would be the non-licensed units, because that's where we have our big challenge as a district.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilor Moulton.
Thank you, Dr. Provost, for your presentation. I'm glad to hear that there is a focus on increasing pay for ESPs as well as teachers. I think that ESPs have shouldered a lot of responsibility during the pandemic and have been tremendous frontline workers, and they're very deserving of increased pay. My questions actually have to do with ESP comings and goings. I'm trying to pull together a couple of different aspects here of your presentation. You mentioned that the additional staffing in FY22, most of that was ESPs, correct? And
That's
some
correct.
of that was a result of students having issues resulting from the pandemic that needed attention. The cuts, the reductions, about half of those are ESPs. So I'm wondering what's the rationale for losing ESPs when they were very important this year? And then my other question related to that is, in the COVID relief funds, you're proposing to spend almost I think that's 99,000 to reinstate grade 1 ESPs for FY23 only. So we're cutting some ESPs, we're bringing some back, but only for FY23. Can you address that sort of package of questions about ESP positions?
Sure. Thank you for the question. In terms of reductions overall, I would say there are a few things that that we think about. One is that the needs of our population change on a daily basis because the students we have in the schools change on a daily basis. Students move in, students move out, some students graduate, and the needs of the students themselves change. So one of the things we do when developing the budget for next year is we take a look at every single ESP who has an assignment currently and see whether that assignment is expected to continue into the next year. And so based on that analysis, we felt that there was flexibility to do the reduction that we've proposed in the ESPs. And then to your question about the first grade ESPs, we actually had proposed reducing those first grade ESPs as one of the budget proposals the administrative team had made, and received direction from the school committee to place them back. Now, those first grade ESPs were positions that historically had not existed in the budget. They were added to the budget last year in order to help support first grade classes. And honestly, principals reported that those first grade ESPs were being pulled quite consistently throughout the year because we had other positions that were unfilled that were more critical. And So thinking about trying to make a budget or trying to make the best use of public funds, they were positions really that we could say we could do without, because the reality is we weren't using the first grade ESPs as first grade ESPs for most of the year. In terms of the plan going forward, in that discussion, I think there was concern that the school committee had of wanting to try to continue to provide additional support for our youngest learners for an additional year. But I think they also accepted the rationale that maybe these weren't as critical as some of the other positions that were in the budget. So the plan that we made was to fund them for 1 year with COVID relief funds and then sunset the positions. One of the things I'll say is there's enough turnover within the ESP unit that we think the reductions of the first grade ESPs for FY24 will not result in layoffs. We think that there will be positions that we'll be able to move them into. So it's really a kind of reduction that we believe we'll be able to do through attrition.
All right, so just one follow-up. You're buying yourself another year of evaluating the need of grade 1 ESPs.
Correct.
By using this one-time COVID relief money. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
President Nash.
Thank you, Chair Maori. Dr. Provost, let's see, I got a few questions here. First up, a member of the Bridge Street School Council sent me a spreadsheet, and I shared that with you earlier. It's a spreadsheet from DESE that allows one to rank districts in terms of their per pupil spending. And using the 2020 numbers, you can plug in anything 2020 or earlier. So the most recent are 2020. Northampton ranks in the lower third for total per pupil spending at $15,929. I'm hoping that you could speak to this both in terms of the factors that have Northampton lower on the list, but more importantly, the adequacy of our current per pupil spending. Are we spending enough? Are we meeting our needs?
Thank you. And thank you for sending me the question in advance so that I had the opportunity to look through the spreadsheet. And
yeah, I thought that would be fair.
So I really believe that this comes down to regional variability and district type. The reason I said regional variability, going back to my answer to Councillor Labarge's question, is it costs a different amount to fund education in different parts of the state. The main reason for that is that the cost of living is different in different parts of the state, and the wages consequently reflect that in different parts of the state. In fact, when you go in the another DESE worksheet, it's called the DART, they break up the state into like 5 or 6 different comparable regions, which roughly correspond to some of the counties within our district or within our state. So Northampton correctly is listed at $15,929 per pupil. But the other districts in the bottom third are the other districts from our part of the state. So we're 121 from the bottom on that list. So other ones in the bottom third are East Hampton, that's number 45. West Springfield is number 57. Belchertown is number 65. Hatfield's number 66. South Hadley's number 72. Granby's number 76. Westfield is number 99. Longmeadow is 102. So those are all districts in our area that are all in that same range. In fact, all of those are below us. And the other thing is that they are also municipal pre-K to 12 districts, because the type of district that you're running also influences the per pupil cost. One of the things that you'll find in the top third are there a number of towns that may be regionalized at 6 through 12. And so, but may still have their own district below the middle school level. And so they have a very small number of students, which drives up the per pupil cost. So for example, there are some districts out there that exist that are only several hundred students because they regionalize after the elementary level. And that results in a very high per pupil cost because they still have a principal, they're still paying a portion of all the district costs, they're still paying a portion of the superintendent's salary, et cetera. So that tends to push them into the top third. The other thing is that top third is, you'll find, dominated by vocational schools, including Smith Voc. Smith Voc is in the top third of districts in the state. And that's because the cost of a vocational education is inherently higher than the cost of a traditional pre-K to 12 education. For one thing, vocational schools have to essentially have two faculties. They have an academic faculty and they have a vocational faculty. So they have about twice as many teachers per student. Obviously that drives up the per pupil cost. And they also have much more expensive equipment than the type of equipment that's required to run an academic school setting. So it's really, the area of the state we're in, the type of district we're running, that causes us to be in the bottom third. Now, in terms of adequacy, one of the things that I look at is the actual net school spending as a percentage of the required school spending. Right now, Northampton is spending, or I shouldn't say right now, I should say FY19, which is the last year that was been audited and finalized by the state. Our spending was 125% of the required amount. I think the statewide average for that year was 126% of the required amount. So I think we're right on the money in terms of adequacy. We know that the minimum required amount is not adequate, although some districts do have that. I think looking at trying to be around 125, 126% of the minimum threshold is a good place to be, because that's on average where the state is.
Thank you. So just a follow-up on that. So the other districts that are in the eastern part of the state, if they're at 125%, they're also spending a lot more money, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Their minimum number is higher. Every district has a different minimum number.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
My next question, could you provide an overview of the contract step system and how annual increases in pay could play out? Just so
Sure.
I could have an idea of how that works.
Sure. So I will talk about the teacher's contract in particular, although we have 6 units, because there are similarities across the 6 units. And I think the teacher's unit is probably the most complex. So if I can explain this one, then you'll see how the rest of them work as well. So our what we call the salary grid is based on a system of steps and lanes. So a step is a year of experience in education. It can be a year of experience within our district or other public districts. You don't necessarily have to start at the first step, which for us, I think at this point is step 3. Correct me if I'm wrong, because we've dropped some steps in the past. And so what happens is every year that a teacher is continuously employed in the district, they will move up a step until they get to the top step, which I think at this point is step 14. The movement between each of those steps on the teacher's contract is essentially 4.5%. So it's a 4.5% pay raise until teachers get what's called stepped out, which means they're at the top of the column and they have nowhere else to go. This is why the conversation about COLAs always becomes important in negotiations, because the teachers who are stepped out, which is a number of our teachers, which also tells me that we're doing a good job with retention, don't have any more 4.5% steps to make. They only can make the COLA. So for a teacher who's lower paid, who's stepping, they would get the 4.5% in between steps, plus whatever COLA is negotiated. And then the teachers who are on their top steps just get the COLA. Now, we also have a column system, which means that it's possible to not only move horizontally down the page by years of experience, but also to move vertically across the page by getting higher levels of education. So we pay, every teacher needs a minimum of a bachelor's degree. There's a column for bachelor's degree. In order to remain licensed within the first 10 years, they have to earn a master's degree. When that happens, they move over into the master's column. That's higher wages, but has the same steps in between. When a teacher, in order to remain licensed, needs to continue to take professional development. And so when they've accumulated 30 credits beyond the master's degree, they move into another column, which is a higher paid column. Some teachers will get a CAGS or an EDS degree, which is sort of like the all but dissertation degree that a lot of schools offer. That's another column. And then we have a column for teachers who have their doctoral degree, which we do have a few of. So teachers make increases in three ways. One is continuous employment in the district, which is steps. The other is increasing their level of education, which is columns. And then the third way is COLAs.
Thank you. I think
I'll just say
it's really helpful, because I think we'll be hearing a lot about these things over the next few weeks, few months, and that was helpful.
Sure, you're welcome. And I would just say that the main difference between that and the other units is many of them just have a straight step system, don't have a recognition for higher levels of education.
Really?
Yeah.
Go Northampton. All right. So another question, could you provide an overview of the efforts of the school system during the pandemic? How effective were those efforts, and how many of these resources remain in place? I think you've kind of already touched on this, but.
Sure. So I love to share data. I'm a data-driven superintendent, and I don't want to bore you because I know there are other important departments lined up behind me, but if I could only pick one piece of information as sort of a gauge of how well the district is doing, I would pick third grade reading. This year, we put a number of resources in place to help students recover some of the unfinished learning they had during the COVID year last year when schools were shut down. And at the beginning of this year, 25% of our third graders were at moderate or high risk for reading problems based on our fall assessment. So we have worked very hard with elementary students in particular through a program known as Liftoff Learning you may have heard about. By the spring, we had reduced the number of third graders at high or moderate risk for learning problems to 18%. And then just to look at the other side, for math, 36% started third grade at moderate or high risk for developing learning problems in mathematics, more than a third. But by the end of the year, that had been reduced to 14% of third graders. So I think our academic recovery efforts have been solid. We will be pulling back on Liftoff Learning next year. We won't be having that same type of after-school intervention. I no longer think it's needed. We are continuing to flex resources into the elementary schools, mainly by reprogramming some resources from middle school, which we've seen were not so significantly needed. The other side of our three-sided equation, if you will, is social emotional support. So we do social emotional screeners to assess how things are coming along. And there we found that the elementary students bounced back more quickly than older students did. So by the winter of this year, we were seeing students in the elementary level demonstrate what we would consider typical levels of risk in terms of their social emotional development. You know, in other words, not any different than they were prior to COVID. That was not the case with the middle and high school. We this year implemented $100,000 CSO collaboration to provide a surge of counseling support for middle and high school students because we had some data indicating that that was going to be a need. And we've seen some improvements at the high school in particular, but students at the high school continue to show higher level of risk for social emotional problems than would be expected. And in the middle school, particularly so. In fact, the middle school students showed higher levels of risk this year than they did when we measured them last winter. And think of it, that was when we were still basically remote. Now, a third of those students are different students than they were before. So it's not an exact apples to apples comparison. But anyways, based on that information, we decided to keep the partnership with CSO in place for another year. But my hope is that after another year, we'll be able to begin pulling back on that. I did meet with leadership of CSO to see if there's any research, even if it's speculative research, about how long this is likely to last for adolescents. And really, there's nothing out there right now. We're kind of in uncharted waters. So the best we can do is to continue to assess and continue to provide resources where we see the needs.
Well, thank you. It speaks to all of the work that you and the school committee and all of our teaching professionals have had to deal with the last few years. We on council, we know there's been a lot of work done by council over the last 2 years, but we were well aware of what was going on with our colleagues over in school committee. We would see all of those meetings as we're searching through for our own agendas, and we know you were all quite busy, and I really appreciate that. All right, I have one more question. It's kind of, and it relates to, I'm going to quote from you in your budget statement. Every indication points to level funding or modest reduction in state and federal support for education in Northampton for the next several years. In order to avoid reaching a painful funding cliff, it is important to begin implementing cost-containing measures at this time. To get a sense of what we're looking at in the next few years for this cliff, roughly how many positions will need to be eliminated in 2024, 2025? And also, if it's possible to look at it in another way, if we fully fund the current staffing levels for those years, what would the request by the school department roughly look like a year from today or 2 years from today?
Thanks for that question as well. And if anyone wants to talk offline about the frustrations about the funding system, I'd be happy to talk about that. But to put it, just give you one fact, in terms of actual dollars, not inflation adjusted dollars or anything, but the amount of state support we're receiving in Northampton is actually less than it was 20 years ago. Okay, so that's my reason for thinking that the future is likely to be much like the past. I know there's another view out there. There's a view that the Fair Share Amendment will result in an infusion of cash, which I certainly hope it does, because it's badly needed. But when I build a budget, I kind of always take a conservative approach in making sure that I don't count on funds that haven't arrived yet. Because I have I think one of my first responsibilities as an employer is making sure that I can make payroll, and making sure that I don't extend myself beyond what we can reasonably afford. So to answer your question, this is speculative, and this is where Nick might want to jump in and correct me. But, I think that to answer your question the first way, which is what the shortfall of the cliff might look like and what it might mean in positions, I would suspect that you're looking at least $300,000 shortfall in school budget next year, more likely in the $400,000 to $600,000 range. But if you take sort of the midpoint of those estimates, which would be $450,000, that would be essentially 6 teachers or 18 ESPs, or likely be some combination of teachers and ESPs. To answer your question the second way, what would be necessary to fully fund the positions that are currently in the budget? You would be looking at what's in this year's budget plus some escalator for wage inflation and other types of inflation, like utilities, energy. That's been quite challenging to deal with as well. So if this year's budget is a 5.07% increase, I think, to fully fund the budget or the positions that are currently in the budget, you'd probably need 5.5% to 6% in upcoming years, which is about $1.8 to $2 million a year of increases. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but that's about the best estimate I could put on it. I don't know if Nick thinks that's realistic, or if we don't hear from him, we're going to assume that he thinks it's realistic.
Yeah, I think it's realistic. Just good evening, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Nick Bernier, the school business administrator. Thank you for welcoming me to the meeting tonight. I think Dr. Provost's projections are pretty accurate. The major thing is really the amount of salary that we have on school choice, because that money, we're not getting the revenue that we need to sustain the amount of salary in there. So the local budget is going to have to start absorbing that, at a time in which, there's going to be wage inflation as well, based on whatever our next CBA settles at. So I think you're probably looking at a good 6% increase to maintain what's there now going into FY24.
Can I weigh in super quick? Let me first, CBA means collective bargaining agreement. These folks don't do collective bargaining, so just to help them out with any acronyms. Can I give a little bit of a historical perspective in terms of increases? So I think, I said in my budget message that this is the second largest increase in 15 years. Just generally, so this is also the first time that you have, so last year it was a 4% increase. This is a 5.07% increase. Usually they're more somewhere in the 3 range or high 2s. So the last time there was a significant increase or over 4.5 was 6.27% in 2014. Which was, as I said in the budget messages, just right after we sort of established the fiscal stability plan and infused that money in there to plug that giant hole that we had on in the budget. But then the next year, the increase was 3.36%. Generally, when there's a year where there's a significant increase that's sort of trying to plug a hole, it's never been then followed by a similar or larger increase the next year. It's just sort of not, it's not sustainable, particularly because these compound over time.
Well, that was a great answer from all 3 of you. Thank you. John, I just want to thank you for all that you do for Northampton. And I think the word has been out there that you might be looking for work elsewhere. And I just want to thank you for all of the fine work that you've done. And also that you, just in the last few minutes, you demonstrated the amount of skill that you've brought to this position, and I really appreciate it. And you know what? I kind of hope that you don't get other jobs and that you're sticking around. So I hope you're here next year working with us on the next budget. So, but really, thank you very much for all you've done for Northampton.
You're welcome. This is a great district and a great community, and I'm really happy to be a part of it.
I thank you, Councilor Maori. My questions are done.
They're good questions. Let's see, Councilor Labarge.
Yes, I have a question for the mayor, please. Mayor, I want to ask you a question. Why did you vote against the increase in the school committee budget at their school committee meeting?
Well, I mean, so as I wrote in the message, it was stated by the school committee, the people who had recommended the increase, that they recognized there was no, they had no reoccurring funds to back it up. And so, as I said at that point, I didn't think that was a responsible way to budget. And as Dr. Provost said, you know, I feel very strongly my responsibility to people's employment, and creating a budget hole or a larger budget hole concerns me very much. So unless I know there are reoccurring funds for something that will not just reoccur every year, but will compound, it gives me great pause about funding it. So that's since the school committee was very open about the fact that they knew there was no reoccurring funds for that 250, and it was over not just the initial 4% that Charlene and I worked out was something we felt we could afford for the schools. And then there was the additional 109 that we managed to pull together by making cuts on the city side. That additional 250 was not something that I was comfortable with. But I did incorporate it into the budget. And as I explained, I agree that this is a really challenging time, and that we, you know, the schools are really feeling that they need some extra support. But as I said, I and the rest of the school committee, and perhaps you all, we really need to figure out how we are going to make up all of these one-time funds that are being used to support the school budget.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
Welcome.
Councilor Elkins.
Yeah, I have to, I'm going to do that thing. I don't have a question so much as a comment. I have to say it is incredibly sobering, and I'm really concerned about this projected deficit that we're putting ourselves into. I understand why the school committee made the decisions that they did, and why, you know, there is a feeling of that we are in we're all in a tremendously difficult place. But as somebody who, you know, I worked very hard and really bought into the city's long-term financial plan with the general overrides, and what that did for the stability of the city, it's distressing to know that we are buying layoffs. We're literally buying layoffs in a few years. And that's what we're doing with this budget. And I don't look forward to that day. And I hold out some hope that, that we're not the only community in this position, and that the sheer force of this desperation of this unfair funding formula and all the things that it brings with us, and how all those things, you know, will somehow push to the top to where it needs to be, so that the state gives us the funding, sorts out the problem at that level. But I applaud you for your vote, Mayor. It's a difficult, you know, political choice, and it was a difficult, you know, stance to take in the face of what everybody needs. But we have to take this seriously. We're going to be signing our own kids' teachers' pink slips in a few years, if we continue on this course. And so, like I said, and all that is to say, I don't have an answer or solution for it. And I'm, glad we are working it out for this year, but it's serious, the hole that we're digging.
Counselor Moulton.
Thank you. Yeah, I concur with Councilor Elkins. And I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly the explanation for how this additional money is being provided. And I'm thinking that I'm finding it on page 151, a page about debt service, and it's delaying the borrowing. Is that correct, Mayor?
There are a few things that helped contribute to it. That you are correct, that is one of the factors.
Is that a major factor?
Charlene, do you want to speak to that? Charlene can best speak to that. But there are other factors. We cut additional requests from city departments, things that had been requested were not incorporated, and we've delayed some initiatives. We also, a major factor is we're not adding it with the fiscal stability plan. We were scheduled to add $230,000 to the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund, and we are not adding that. And then the additional, Charlene will speak to that third component.
Yes, in addition, that piece is a large component. By delaying the bond and not having it hit the FY23 budget, we saved 565,000. It was over 500,000 in the budget.
Oh, okay, so my question then is, what are the potential negative consequences of delaying borrowing in the current fiscal environment? Specifically, are we going to end up paying higher interest rates?
We may a little bit. We're going to actually bond in September, so we're not delaying it a full year. We did talk with bond counsel about this. So by bonding in September, we may pay 0.25% more on the borrowing. But we felt in order to afford the things that were being asked from the city, that this was one of the best avenues for us to take.
Thank you.
And can I just quickly add? So at risk of talking about the bond rating too much, which I think is very important, because we have maintained that highest level bond rating. We do get to borrow at the lowest possible rate. But you are right that we are in a moment where interest rates are potentially increasing.
And if I may, I just want to add to that. So we did speak with not only bond counsel, but our financial advisors. And although like the mayor just said, there is that risk, we didn't feel it was like a high risk, like I said, versus June versus September. We think we'll still be on a very good track, and our bond rating and the amount we still think it'll work out really well.
And we refinanced, so we saved $430,000, I think, over the next 10 years. But we were able to refinance earlier, I think it was in March, which saved us interest over the next 10 years.
Okay, I believe Councillor Foster, did you have your hand up? And then Councillor Gore.
I did, but I kind of talk a lot, so I'll defer to Councilor Gore and then.
Okay.
Go on. Thank you.
I
wanted to thank Dr. Provost for his presentation, and I wanted to thank the mayor for approving this school committee budget, because I think it's really important. And we got a lot of emails from constituents about, the ESPs that don't get paid enough and how we're losing a lot of them. And I really felt for them, because I was an ESP at one time. And so I know you're still in contract negotiation, but I wonder where the additional funds are going to go to.
So was that directed to Dr. Provost?
Yeah,
So I think it's fair to say that the additional funds in the budget were not for the maintenance of positions that currently exist or the operational needs of the district, but were added in order to create additional flexibility for negotiation. So, where that will all end up will depend on where the parties decide they want to allocate the money through the negotiation process, but that is money that's going directly to our employees.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Counselor Foster.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Provost. And this conversation has been really good. I've certainly learned a lot. I guess I have a comment and then a couple of just specific questions for you. So it's frustrating, and I don't need, you're the choir, I don't need to preach to you about the way the funding formulas work out and the giant deficits that we have and the choices we need to make as a city. And meanwhile, at the state level, the governor is touting a budget surplus, and that leaves cities and towns like ours wringing our fingers over $250,000 while our ESPs are being paid $16 an hour. It's like, it's so completely unconscionable. And I hate that we're here in this position having this discussion. But here we are. The piece I want to, I guess, just sort of add the concern that I just haven't heard brought up as we talk about the additional funds, is that teachers are leaving the profession in record numbers for all kinds of reasons. And we know that, and I understand that retention in Northampton is tracking higher. But the other piece that weighs on me is the need to keep students in the district so that we don't increase our charter school funding obligations as well. And it's so hard because we're making all of these choices, but I just wanted to add that in as we're talking about this, increase, and it's going directly to staff and hopefully shoring up the needs of the students, retaining high quality long-term staff, boosting morale, all of these things. But the other thing that it can do for Northampton is keep students in the district. And we're looking at our, $2.3 million deficit of charter school sending tuition, and the more students we're able to keep, sort of a very long-term vision. But we hopefully down the road are less indebted in that way. So I just wanted to bring that piece up. And then Dr. Provost, a couple specific questions for you is I remember when the school committee was discussing their budget, there was a talk about delaying the implementation of not treating school grounds or playing fields with pesticides, delaying that implementation to find a little more money in the budget for staff. And then I believe that this plan is going to retain that extra 6th grade teacher, but I wondered if you could just address those two things to make sure I'm clear.
Sure, you're correct on both points. The school committee adopted a resolution to end the use of pesticides on our playing fields. And just for those of you who are new to the conversation, the only place where we use any pesticide is at the athletic fields at the high school. So the fields that we maintain at all the other schools are untreated with anything, organic or inorganic. At the high school, there is one treatment that we do every spring. It's a crabgrass pre-emergent. And other than that, we've essentially already transitioned over to organics there as well. But the cost of going fully organic was quite a bit. I think it was around, Nick can help me here, but I think it was around $75,000.
It was 71,000. The entire line item was 75, but 4,000 would have been what was there from previous years.
So the policy that was adopted by the school committee did provide 3 years for implementation. So we still have an obligation coming there. So that wasn't figured into the numbers I gave earlier in response to President Nash's question. There will be an additional 75,000 that needs to be absorbed over the next couple of years to do the transition to organics. And then you are correct. The position was maintained at the 6th grade. But the team structure will still be reduced from 3 teams to 2 teams.
Can I just follow up with that? Are there fewer students anticipated in the 6th grade, or was it a sort of general restructuring you felt you could do with more consistent numbers?
It was a general restructuring to address one of the issues that's been brought up by 6th grade teachers, which is because they follow what is more like an elementary model than a middle school model. They're responsible for a number of different subjects, and the curriculum at grade 6 is starting to get very complex. And so by restructuring from 3 teams to 2 teams, they're able to reduce the number of different subjects that each teacher is required to teach. It's similar to the 7th and 8th grade model at the middle school, where there are also 2 teams and where teachers are really subject specialists. So the hope there was that there's a trade-off, which is you'll have more students you see, but you'll be focusing on a content area or fewer subjects you're teaching. The hope is that by allowing teachers to specialize a little bit more, they can address the content in a deeper way, to develop greater expertise in a smaller sliver of the content, and not be stretched so far in terms of the different things that we're asking them to do.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Oh, Mayor.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge the other point that Councillor Foster made. And she and I have certainly talked about this. I think probably all of you have heard me rail against how incredibly wrong and broken the different formulas are at the state level and its impact on Northampton. And I just want to acknowledge what you said. And it's true. It is immoral that there is huge money elsewhere, and we are always in this constant fight and fighting over scraps for our schools. And that, as Dr. Provost said, we get less money from the state now in actual dollars than we did 20 years ago. It's completely wrong, and it pits all different groups against each other, and it's just it's fundamentally wrong. And so thank you for bringing up that point.
Yeah. I actually have a question and a comment as well. My question was also about the 6th grade. So there is a reduction in the ESP and ESP staff for 6th grade.
Correct.
And you felt like the 6th grade could kind of absorb that because of the restructuring, or just kind of felt like it had to happen? Or
That's correct, because each ESP or each team had an ESP assigned. So having one fewer team meant one less ESP.
Yeah. Okay. And thank you for that comment, Mayor. I'm hoping with a new administration, a new governor, that we will see some change, because I was thinking when you were speaking that, and our needs have never been higher. And that's what I would say about the situation this year. I really am impressed with, Mayor, with your ability to kind of pivot on this, because it isn't ideal. And that's what you had to, I'm sure, kind of accept, is it's not ideal. And it's kind of a risky experiment. But I would say that the needs of our students are so high now, and our teachers and staff have been through so much, that if there's ever a year to push the envelope, this is the year, because every year counts for these students. And we might have some unpleasant things ahead of us, but at this point, I think every year we can provide, better quality education and services is just, it's a huge investment. And I think also what Councillor Foster was saying, there's all these other factors that could really, to me, I'd like to hold on to the hope that that there's actually by investing in the quality of our education and our teachers and staff, that we'll actually see a return from that investment in terms of retention of students and the growth of our school system. So I'm going to hold on to that one. Anyone else, counselors or Gwen, have any comments? Any members of the public? I see our friend Gwen. But anyone else have anything to say or add before we let Superintendent? Hi, Gwen. Did you have, no, you don't. Okay. Thanks for being with us. Okay, thank you very much, Superintendent Provost.
You're very welcome. Have a great night. It was
Yeah.
wonderful to be able to talk about the school budget. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you.
okay. Good night. Okay. Next on our agenda would be Chief Casper and the Northampton Police Department presentation. Welcome, Chief Casper.
Hey, good evening. How's everybody doing? Good to be with you.
I'm gonna shut the door.
All right, so I just wanted to begin by giving you a brief overview of the proposed FY23 police budget. There's very few changes, so my statement regarding the budget specifically is pretty brief. And then I'll just take a moment to update you all on the state of NPD and how we've served our community over the past year. So this year's proposed budget for police services is $6,201,817, which is a $7,617 decrease from FY22. Just to break that down a little bit, our FY23 personnel services budget is unchanged other than step adjustments similar to other city departments. The ordinary maintenance budget includes $31,434 decrease to technology services line. As you're all likely aware, the IT department took over IT services for the police department, and that includes paying for some of the police IT costs out of their budget instead of ours. And the OOM budget remains at zero. As many of you also may be aware, the OOM budget had previously funded the purchase of vehicles, but vehicle funding in FY23 is instead part of the capital improvement plan. And just regarding the OM budget, it's challenging to predict anticipated expenditures due to the nature of our unpredictable work. But to inform my FY23 budget, I conducted a 2-year look back. In FY20, we needed 94.1% of that budget, and in FY21, we needed 98.8%. So we're always very close in that budget area. Despite the fact that supply costs are increasing in almost all areas, particularly fuel, which you're all well aware of, and I anticipate that to continue, I'm not seeking an increase to the OM budget. I understand, as we just heard from Dr. Provost and many other department heads, the city's under financial strain by personnel and operational needs from all departments. And so we will work with what we have. And that's really my statement specific to the budget. And I just wanted to update you on where the department is. Last year, I spoke to council about the outcome of their decision to defund the police department in 2020. And I wish I could tell you all that the impact of that vote is lessening, that we're nearing recovery. We are not. The two clearest outcomes from the budget cut were the loss of funding for 5 police officer positions and the loss of the entire vehicle budget. However, beyond those immediate losses, the long-term consequences have had a significant and detrimental impact on NPD. The national and community climate in combination with employment insecurity from defunding took its toll on all of our staff. Reflective of the sudden decline in morale, we began to struggle with employee retention. I spoke to you all about this last year. Within weeks of the vote to defund, officers began leaving the police department, and unfortunately that has continued. Since we were defunded, in addition to the 5 positions that were lost, 17 officers, that's 28% of our police department, have left the agency. 14 resigned and 3 retired. We had a few early retirements. Those who resigned did not leave the field of policing, but instead they left the city of Northampton and joined police agencies in other communities. They took with them thousands of hours of academy and field training, the invaluable life and work experience gained from the complex and challenging job of policing. Conservatively, it cost the city a minimum of $46,000 to hire and train a single officer. So each time an individual leaves, the city must train a new officer and spend another $46,000. So employees who have left since we were defunded cost the city about $782,000 in training costs. Surrounding communities are currently benefiting from Northampton's police training and educational investments. As a result of this employee loss, we're now struggling to meet minimum staffing levels and routinely require people to work overtime to ensure basic staffing. Officers sometimes sign these shifts voluntarily, but if not, people are unexpectedly forced over to work. And so that you have the most accurate understanding of current conditions at our department right now, In just about the last 6 weeks between April 15th and May 31st, I looked at these overtime shifts and holdovers. NPD officers have been continuously forced over to work beyond their scheduled hours so that basic minimum staffing levels are met. So currently our minimum staffing is 4 or 5 officers on the street for a city of nearly 30,000 people. And just in these past 6 weeks, we forced over officers 18 times to work 16-hour shifts and 26 times to work 12-hour shifts. Additionally, officers have volunteered to work 28 16-hour shifts and 34 12-hour shifts. Again, this is just to meet minimum staffing levels. And unfortunately, this is the new normal for our officers. At a time when every decision that an officer makes is under intense scrutiny, we're asking officers to do that when they're overworked and exhausted. It's really dangerous for all involved, and it further contributes to low morale, burnout, and the loss of trained and experienced officers. In addition to that, another outcome of the budget cut and climate was the decrease in people applying for police positions with NPD. Since the council's vote in 20, we've had a 32% decrease in applications to be a police officer. And this number of applications is barely enough to meet the demands caused by employee loss. As it stands today, we remain short the 5 unfunded positions, and out of the 60 full-time police positions that are funded, 10 of those positions are filled by people who are not available to work as solo police officers. They're either in long-term training like the academy or the field training program, out injured, on family medical leave. So out of those officers, we're down to just 50 available. In addition to probable continued resignations, we anticipate additional employees leaving in FY23 due to retirements. As it stands now, we're doing everything we can to keep our heads above water and provide bare minimum staffing to provide police services to the city. So how does this impact community members? In short, we're not meeting community demand. I routinely get calls from community members asking why there are no officers downtown anymore, why officers are not available or haven't called them back, and why no officers are available on their street to assist with traffic and safety concerns. Just to give you an idea of the most recent information in this area, since May 20th, so that's the last 11 days, we have had no officers available to respond to 53 calls for service. These calls include medical calls for a person with multiple lacerations, intrusion alarms, 911 hang-up calls, trespassing calls, traffic collisions, including one in front of the high school, thefts, disturbances, and many others. And that's just in the last 11 days. Thousands of calls for police services come from community members each year. I'm not going to go over those details. I provided those to you in the budget statement that the mayor includes with the proposed budget. But in general, you can see we've handled about 33,000 calls a year in lots of different areas, as well as a lot of administrative work, things like license to carry firearms, sex offender registrations, lots of other activities that people don't always think of. Beyond all of these challenges, I do have some good news to share. While handling our demanding call volume, we've been busy in many other areas over the last year. We have mental health clinicians working with us and responding to calls for service. We have rerouted cases through a restorative justice program, avoiding the creation of a criminal record, striving for better closure to potential criminal cases, and with the goal of reducing recidivism. We've updated all of our required policies and practices so that we're in compliance with the state's police reform law. And as the first police department in the Commonwealth to join President Obama's White House Police Data Initiative, we remain committed to accountability and transparency by publishing open data regarding employee demographics, use of force, arrests, training, and other areas of public interest. We were also the first municipal police department in the Commonwealth to join the 30 by 30 initiative, committing ourselves to diversity in hiring. We remain accredited and have been since 2002. We continue to evolve in order to ensure that we're providing the best level of police service that we are able to with our limited resources. I really appreciate this time to speak with you all tonight and your consideration of this proposed budget. The public's safety is my responsibility and yours. I think I've been clear that our response capabilities have diminished over the past 2 years, and we're unable to keep up with the demand for police services in the city. When people call for help, they expect and deserve to have highly skilled officers respond promptly. And this is not accomplished through a revolving door of new officers who we train and send off into other communities. So the only way to achieve this is by supporting and maintaining a workforce of educated, professional, well-trained, and experienced police officers. We're doing the best we can with what we have, Your support of the FY23 budget will help provide some stability to our agency and to our officers, and will support the invaluable and critical police services that we provide. So thank you again for listening, and of course, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief Casper. Counselors? I feel like my sound is not working. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, counselors, and any questions or comments? Counselor Labarge.
Thank you. What the heck?
We can hear you, Counselor Labarge.
I don't know what's happened here.
You can't hear us?
I just went blank.
Huh? Can you hear me right now?
I can hear you, but I'm going to shut it off and re-sign in again.
Because we can see you if you.
I don't know what's happened.
That's odd.
The screen. We can see and hear you.
If you want, if you're comfortable asking your question or making your comment, we can see you. But if you'd rather,
you can still see me.
Yep.
I can't see you at all.
Well, I'm very good looking, and if you'd like to, log off and log on, we can wait. But if
I'm gonna do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else have comments or questions for Chief Casper? Yes, Counselor Gore.
Thanks for your presentation, Chief Casper. I just had a quick question about what do you think the impact of the Department of Community Care will have on calls that the police department might get that can kind of alleviate some of the pressure that might be on the department, with the calls that might be calls that the Department of Community Care can take?
Thank you for the question. I don't know. Right. So I'm just being honest that I think that the Department of Community Care is still in a developmental stage, and there's a lot of learning to be done. And I think we're all interested to know what role different responders will play. What I do know is that as of July 1st, 22, there's no one to help us with calls. So it's still going to remain the same. I'm hesitant to guess or say anything about what may happen over time. I'm looking at other agencies. I'm of course watching Amherst, and there's some other interesting models around the nation that are all implementing different models of alternative responders. And I think I'm watching with curiosity and openness to kind of see what will happen and what kind of calls will alternative responders be able to handle. But right now, I just don't know. I don't know what that's going to look like in Northampton.
Councilor Foster.
Thank you, Chief Casper, for your report and your forthrightness and letting us know how things are going. I guess a question I have for you about the clinicians that are within the police department, and you and I have spoken a couple of times over the past week, needing to provide support to somebody. And I'm wondering how the clinicians are funded. I didn't see them in NPD's budget. Is that a separate grant funded position?
Yep. Thank you, Counselor. It's a DMH grant. So we have year-to-year funding through DMH, Department of Mental Health, to support clinicians.
Great. I commend you for seeking that and for instituting that. It's really, it's a tricky thing when people need support and there's not someone available to call. And so I appreciate that you've brought that option in. I think it's really commendable, and I know how much is on your plate. So thank you. And is the restorative justice, is that also grant funded as well?
No, although it's a relatively small fee. It's $2,500 annually to participate. And most the circles are actually run by mediators they're volunteers. It's purely volunteer driven. So the $2,500 that we pay annually is just really for the organization of volunteers. We work with a nonprofit called C4RJ. It's just the letters and then 4 the number RJ. and they're out of the eastern part of the state. And so there are, of course, administrative tasks, training, all that sort of thing that goes into running this really statewide program. And we're really thankful to have partnered with them. They've been great.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is more of a, maybe a bigger picture question. You know, I recognize the climate for hiring, retaining police officers is a challenging one. And I'm curious about those who've stayed. If you could talk a little bit about what the department, you as chief, and what the department may be doing to support retention of the officers who have stayed.
We're doing the best we can. Honestly, it's very difficult. I mean, many people just don't want to be in this field anymore, or may not want to service this particular community. It kind of depends. There are officers here who are just incredibly committed to the profession and to getting the job done and to taking care of the community. And we're doing our best to support them. And the way we do that is by, you know, making sure that their message is shared. You know, what's going on, I'm able to talk about and be a voice for everyone in this building, so that the city really has an understanding of what it's like. When I mentioned the holdovers for shifts, I mean, we've all, I don't know what time you all wake up in the morning, but many of you maybe get up at 5 or 6 in the morning. I know I get up early. And these are officers that get up early. And you can imagine right now, we're all here together. But if at 10 o'clock I said to you, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm actually going to just toss you a pair of keys and ask you to work for another 8 hours. You know, we're tired. And this is the norm. This is what we're doing to our officers. It's not good. It's not good for many reasons. Their mental health, safety, you know, liability, there's a lot of things mixed into it. We're understaffed. That doesn't really answer the question, Counselor, of how I'm getting them to stay. But all I can say is I think sharing that information with you all and with the public, so that they have an understanding of what's going on in our building and what our capabilities are, is one way that we kind of support the people in this building. And then, of course, making sure that we're supporting their mental health, you know, making sure they're having training opportunities, they're staying up on what best practice is, sending them to different sorts of opportunities that support their interests and capabilities here in the city.
See Gwen's hand up. I'm going to let, because Gwen, I believe, is our member of the public here. I'll let you maybe answer your question, ask your question, and then go on. I think it was Counselor Elkins has a question. So yes, Gwen, go ahead.
Okay. I just had a couple of thoughts. How could people in the community somehow not use up the resources as much? Like, are there things that could help, like neighborhood watch, or somehow there being a direct line from communities to the Department of Community Care? That's my question.
Thank you, Gwen.
Councilor Mayor, do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
Is that to me, or
Whoever would like to answer it.
So I just want to clarify what the process is, Counselor Maori.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I was going to direct the question to whoever would like to answer it, whether it's the mayor or Chief Casper.
It's kind of like two questions, I think. Could a neighborhood watch help with the resources in terms of like there being a connection in, you know, neighborhoods that have a higher incidence on the resources? And then the second question is related to the Department of Community Care. It's more of a thought than a question, but if somebody wants to respond to that, they could do that, I guess.
Okay, yeah, so thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
Either the mayor or chief, whoever feels like they want to address it.
I'm happy to address it unless you want to, Mayor.
No, go right ahead if you'd like to, Chief.
I think the department, it's a great question. And I think the Department of Community Care is being developed just for the purpose of exploring these sorts of options and really engaging the community and how the community can be more involved in public safety. So right now, today, at this moment, I don't have an answer for that. I know right now what Neighborhood Watch looks like. And honestly, it's actually some work because it involves police officers usually liaising with community leaders, going to meetings, right? And then there's actually more calls because then you have people out working. So honestly, right now, Neighborhood Watches are great, but they result in more calls to the police because there's kind of more eyes and ears out there that are watching for things that are suspicious. But the Department of Community Care, it would be interesting to consider what these sorts of programs could develop into.
Thank you, Chief. Counselor Elkins.
Yes, I have one comment. One thing that strikes me. So first of all, Chief, thank you for your presentation. It's sobering and helpful to understand where we are. One thing that strikes me is that as a part of the police reform, the report, one of the big things, and there were several recommendations that have gotten a lot of attention and a lot of commitment on the part of electeds and then the community and support. But one thing that hasn't gotten a lot of notice is something that figured very prominently in your presentation, which was the question of overtime and exactly that safety factor that you talked about of officers working tremendous amounts of overtime. And I think the report also focused on the amount of overtime that came in the form of details as well, voluntary details, but spoke to that. So I'm really struck by that because it is a very real compromise we make in terms of safety and judgment when we have officers who are sleep deprived and who have been working long shifts. So I just want to say that was noted. A question that I have is putting aside, not because it's unimportant, but putting aside the question of officers leaving our community in particular. I know that recruitment is a big problem for for departments across the country and the Commonwealth. Do you have a sense of how we stack up compared to other communities in that? Are we doing worse? Are we doing about the same? Any thoughts?
Well, obviously, I like to think that we're the best at everything. No. I think I would certainly tip my hat to former Chief Sinkowitz, who made I would say now a brilliant decision, and I believe it was 2005, to have us get out of civil service. What I know from speaking with my fellow chiefs is that those who are working in civil service communities, so those are the kind of communities where you have to take a written test, that's offered either every year or every other year, and then you get on a list, and there's like this list of names. Those are, when you're on that list, you put down a community you want to work for. When I got hired in Northampton, it was civil service, so my name was on a list. And then there's usually residential preference, and then the list can become exhausted. So those chiefs, if someone great walks in the door and says, hey, I want to be a police officer in this community, they're like, oh, great, are you on the list? Oh, you didn't take the test? Can't even look at them. So in 2005, Chief Sinkowitz said this doesn't work for our community. So we have a lot more flexibility. So I would say we're probably doing in our hiring. So if someone walks in the door and says, I want to be a police officer here, here's my application, we can set up interviews and interview them pretty rapidly. And we're not limited to hiring people just based on, did you get the highest score? Did you get the next highest score? Civil service communities have a lot of limitations in hiring. We just don't have those. So we're able to hire, I think, more diverse candidates. And I mean diverse, like maybe they majored in something else, social work or English or whatever it may be. Not necessarily someone who all through their whole life knew they wanted to be a police officer. They maybe went in the military, they were a CJ major. We can look at a lot of different types of candidates. So I think in that regard, we're very far ahead than civil service departments, but of course still have, our struggles.
Very good, thank you.
President Nash.
Thank you, Chair Maori. Chief, thank you for that very sobering report. I'd love to get a copy of it because I think there was a lot of really good information in there, and that I'd like another pass at it. So if you could send that to me, that would be great. I don't have any questions. You have a level service budget The IT responsibilities were pulled out. This request makes perfect sense to me. And I will be there at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for a series of interviews. Counselors, if you don't know, that one of the things that counselors can be involved in is the interview process with the Northampton Police Department. I've been serving in that capacity the last 2 years. Counselor Foster, I think, has filled in it at one point, and also Laura Fallon from school committee also helped out as yeah, and the mayor when she was on council. But anyway, and I can attest to the first of all the way that we're trying to draw in different candidates. It's interesting to be interviewing somebody who has a customer service experience out in the business world, and here they are, they're interviewing, and or that they're from they're fresh out of social work school. That we are looking for the folks who want to take a different approach to policing. That and that is the hallmark of the Northampton Police Department. That as the budget statement from Chief Casper says, this is a progressive, forward-thinking police department, and I've seen it in action being part of these interviews. And I also really appreciate working with Chief, with your staff, to be part of that process. We got some really amazing people, and also to be part of the interview process for people with folks for promotions as well. And that it's been, from my perspective, it's been very rewarding. And I also, I've witnessed the harm of what's gone on for our department, and that I'm going to say one of the ways we can work towards healing that is by accepting this particular budget, and but I think we need to think of other ways to help with morale with this critical department. And so anyway, Chief, thank you to you and all of the officers over at the NPD. I really appreciate your work, and I'll be there at 8 tomorrow, and I'll expect bagels.
We'll see how the funding vote goes. Yeah. Bagels have gotten pricey.
Thank you.
Councilor Labarge. You need to unmute Councilor Labarge. We still can't hear you. Are you able to unmute? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I've been trying.
Yeah.
For some reason, somebody keeps saying somebody else is not allowing you to do it. Anyways, Chief, I want to thank you and your staff, especially all the time that you have been spending in Ward 6. And it's really, really thoughtful from my neighbors on Perchpit Road and so forth. And, I think you said something about 17 police officers had left your department.
Yep.
And 14 resigned.
Yes.
Okay, so I thought I heard you say to hire and train new officers was at 46,000.
That's correct. Yes, 46,000. That's the low end of it. That's very
right
and conservative.
So the whole training cost period was what, 780 something thousand?
Yes, that was lost when they left. Yes.
That's a lot of money, a lot. And your staffing, your minimum is only 4 or 5 on all shifts?
Yes.
And a decrease in applications, is that 32%?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And all this occurred with defunding the police in 2020, correct?
Over the last 2 years, yes, since that vote in May or June.
Now, has there been an increase like your uniforms, equipment and so forth like that?
I
On
think
the
most,
prices?
yeah, most of the costs for product supplies have increased pretty substantially. I mentioned in my statement, just fuel has gone up quite a bit.
I saw that.
Obviously, we're a type of department that we drive a lot, so we use a lot of fuel. So we're anticipating some, steady, I guess, remaining increases where we are now. And yes, we've noticed that technology areas and other supplies just cost more and take longer to get here.
Now, on your safety minimum for each shift, what is it actually? Because you're saying 4 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it on each shift? Regularly?
Yes. So it's regularly, it's out on the street, how many police officers that we actually have in a car ready to respond to a call is 4 to 5. In the middle of the night at 3 a.m., it can drop down to 3 to 4. We've 3 is honestly, it's a terrible number to be at. 3 is not reasonable to police a city of 30,000 people. It's just one accident and that's it. You all know there was a serious accident today. And at the same time, we had another significant event occurring. We had no officers. So today I talked about the calls that are, we don't have anyone to go to. 4 of those were just today in the afternoon. We don't have police officers to send for service calls. So when we were defunded and we lost the staffing, we dropped the minimum number of people on the street. So at that 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. hour, we used to have a minimum of 4, which even that is pretty narrow, but we dropped it to 3 at the discretion of the officer in charge, kind of depending on, the night and the circumstances. If an officer is being held and they haven't slept for 24 hours, if they've been up since, as I mentioned, 6 a.m. the day before, the supervisor may decide to let them go home. But those are the minimum staffing numbers for the street.
Now, the officers that had left, which was a high amount here, did they go to other communities because they're getting paid more money?
So we do exit interviews when people leave the department, and it was a combination of just feeling not appreciated and valued by the city anymore. And they wanted to go to work for communities where they felt like they were a little more supportive of police and thought police were valuable in a community. And also there's a pay component to some of those communities as well.
Thank you for that question. But I want to thank you and thank the department, all the policemen and policewomen for doing what they're doing to try to keep everybody safe in our community. So I want to thank you. And hopefully with community care now and with our Commissioner Meredith O'Leary, that I think we possibly will see a big difference here in the city, hopefully. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, I'll concur with you, Councilor Labarge, that this is why I was very concerned about the community care department funding, because one of the goals is to alleviate the amount of police influx in terms of calls that could be handled by other entities, so that the police can work on policing. So I'm hoping that the community care department will help in a little bit in that way as well. Not seeing any more. Mayor.
Just to sort of continue that line of thought, and also to kind of go back to Councilor Gore's question about looking at calls, there have been some initial meetings of looking through call logs and trying to make some determinations or beginning to understand which calls could be potentials for DCC. So I just wanted to make sure that the council knew that that was happening. Chief, I think you were part of at least one long meeting around that. And there have been some other ones, and that was before the DCC had become part of DHHS. So, you know, that those are sort of initial times where we're sort of trying to feel things out and figure out how to approach the call question. And now that it's moved into DHHS, that will be, you know, I'm sure that Commissioner O'Leary has a plan on how working with the rest of our public safety to start to make those determinations.
All right. I'm not seeing any more hands, counselors. All right. Well, thank you very much, Chief Casper.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have you here. Okay. Bye. Okay, so that's our two presentations. I believe next on our agenda would be for the Finance Committee to look at the financial orders in front of us and make recommendations. So Finance Committee. The first one on our docket is 2211. Make sure I'm in the right place. 2211, in order to approve FY2023 general fund budget. And I guess we'll take these individually. Yes, Councilor Jarrett.
Yeah, I will have to recuse myself from this one and from the solid waste enterprise fund budget, as I detailed yesterday. But that I will get an opportunity to speak about the general fund tomorrow, and I'm fine. We don't need to try to do some sort of dividing the motion like we'll do tomorrow. We'll just let the Finance Committee have that discussion tonight.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you for that. Yes, President Nash.
Yeah, so in light of that, these financial orders are basically saying, here's the pots of money that we're going to draw from to make this budget work. That what I would like to do is suggest that the Finance Committee, rather than debating each one of these orders tonight, that we move them forward as a group with a positive recommendation to the full council. And then tomorrow evening, we can divide the question so we can get Councilor Jarrett into the room for discussions.
Yeah.
I think that in terms of, so I'm making a motion that we move these, that we send these forward back to council for tomorrow night with a positive recommendation.
I second that.
Okay. Any discussion? President Nash.
Yeah, I want to send these forward with the positive recommendation that, you know, we've done some superior outreach here. We've, you know, this hearing itself has been very well publicized, that it's been run in a very orderly way. Thank you, Councilor Maori. That we've heard lots of terrific feedback from 6 department heads, and that as we move these forward, we've pretty much, I feel like we've gotten the bulk of the information we need to make a decision on next year's budget. So this has been a really great process. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Moulton.
Echo the council president. Impressive presentations, lots of information, accessible to those of us who aren't, you know, all that comfortable with municipal finances. And I think we accomplished a lot in the last 2 evenings.
I agree. They were just really well laid out presentations, and I felt like I learned a lot and have there's nothing can replace that kind of one-on-one human explanation. No amount of looking at the budget would tell us some of the stuff that we learned through our presentation. So thank you to the department heads. And if there are no more comments from finance, we need a roll call on the motion on the floor to send these as a group with a positive recommendation to Council.
Counselor Moulton,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori.
Yes. Okay. So that passes, and I will need one more motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Hold it.
Oh, yes,
I think
Counselor.
we need to close the public hearing.
Yes, we need two more motions then.
That's right.
Right, we decided we're going to vote to close. So Clerk Powers, if we could first.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Okay.
Second it.
Okay.
Thank you,
We'll
Council.
take that roll call first. Motion on the floor is to close the public hearing.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Moulton.
Yes.
Okay. Public hearing so closed. Yes, Counselor Nash.
I'll make a motion to adjourn finance.
Second it.
Okay. Right. Roll call on that.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Moulton,
Yes.
Counselor Nash.
Yes. Okay, now that finance has been adjourned, we are back in the full council, and we have nothing else on the agenda tonight. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn this special city council meeting.
So moved.
So motion made by Counselor Moulton. Who did a second?
I did.
Counselor Labarge. Okay, no discussion on adjourning. Pam, roll call, please.
Counselor Foster,
Yes.
Counselor Gore,
Yes.
Counselor Jarrett,
Yes.
Counselor Labarge,
Yes.
Counselor Moulton,
Yes.
Counselor Maori,
Yes.
Counselor Nash,
Yes.
Counselor Elkins.
Yes.
Thank you.
And thank
Before you guys
Yeah.
leave, can Charlene and I talk scheduling with you real quick? Sorry, Counselor Perry, did you have something?
Well, I wasn't asked to vote, but I will vote yes.
Oh, Counselor Perry. I'm
Oh.
sorry.
So we wanted to talk about the summer schedule and how to make sure that we get some of the things that need to be done with the limited schedule that you have in July and August. Charlene, can you walk through what it is? I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, so every year we make the year-end transfers. So if you remember, usually in the month of July, early July, before the 15th, we need to move funds for budgets that may have been overspent. So we usually do transfers between lines. That is usually, like I said, last year, I think you did it on July 15th. So my question is, are you going to have a meeting in which we can do that? Unfortunately, I mean, what I've been trying to do is that I am watching the budgets and I am watching the salary lines, but we really don't know if there is some invoice that comes in that somebody didn't expect. Up to July 8th, there could be a bill for FY2022 that comes in and pushes somebody just over the edge, and we cannot end the year in deficit in any budget line or any org really, because they'll ding our free cash. So in other words, they'll hold free cash back if we're in deficit in any line. So the idea is that every year we try to fix that. We just try to move money around. It's usually insignificant amounts of money, but it's still, even $1.50, we can't end in deficit. Yeah. So we need to have that vote before July 15th.
So with the new way that finance is handled, we're trying to figure out how that can get done in July.
Okay, so let me look at just trying to look at our schedule.
Right, in July,
We have a council meeting scheduled for the 14th.
Right.
And then finance is the 20th.
Exactly.
But what did you, I'm sorry, did you need something before that, right?
Yeah, so I probably won't be able to submit the order to you until the 14th is Thursday, so probably until that Monday, the 12th. I might be able to get in the Friday before. So I guess I don't know. So with your new way of working, I don't know how we'll do this.
I mean, we could recess in finance for that July 14th council meeting. If it's just one item, that's one suggestion I have.
Yep.
That's what we should
Finance
do.
Within
Yes.
council like previously.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Counselor Jarrett has.
Yeah. I guess
We're
this
not
is
in
just
session. I don't know
informal
who's running this.
discussion.
Yeah.
But we could also, I believe, vote to suspend the rules and simply take 2 votes. Suspend the rules, meaning we do not refer to finance or to the consent agenda of the next meeting.
Exactly.
Because that's just a rule that says we do that, and we can vote to suspend our rules. So that's my understanding. We might want to just absolutely check that with the city solicitor, but also the idea of having a recess for finance, though that would have to be properly posted, I believe.
Right. So
Because we may want, if we do want to refer that to finance, that would be our opportunity.
Yeah, so I mean, any way that you all want to handle it is fine. Obviously, if you were voting to suspend rules, there's a possibility that vote could fail. So, we just need to figure out how we can be sure this will be done in the time frame it needs to be done.
Well,
So-
I want to say that Laura and I, when we went through the calendar, we looked at that date as, it was following it got us away from the holiday week and got us in position. So it was before the 15th and left Director Nardi as much time as possible to pull stuff together. So Director Nardi, does the 14th work well for you?
Yes, it does, as long as one of the 2 things that you just spoke about happens. Either you have, you adjourn within your meeting to hold the finance committee meeting, or as Councilor Jarrett said, just suspend the rules, either one. And as the mayor pointed out, that second option there is the possibility that you wouldn't vote to do that. Then we would not be able to do anything because you wouldn't have posted a finance committee meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, I appreciate your consideration of this process and this time. Thank you.
So we will be getting financial orders to transfer funds that we have so that we can later get them back to us in free cash.
You will be probably using funds that were already voted on somebody's budget. So for instance, say we might move money from, this is just an example, from a department salary line to cover an OM item. Or
Right.
maybe because of overtime, they've gone over, because of vacancies, then we might be using some of their OM. So it's all money that will not go to free cash. It won't add to free cash, but it eliminates us using free cash. So 6 of one, 6 in the other.
Okay. So it's basically balancing the end of the year checkbook and so that, okay. So it's not deliberating any spending. We've already decided to spend the money for these budget lines. And so we're just filling in the gaps to make them all work.
Right. And the biggest, I think the big things you will see is where overtime lines, because of the many vacancies the city has, or because of situations in departments, those will probably be the ones that you will see, or energy lines.
I want to just be a little bit careful that we're really just talking about scheduling right now. I don't want us to veer at all too much into any sort of deliberation. So we need to schedule this meeting to do something that needs to be done by a certain time. And, we certainly can discuss it in depth at that time, but not a public meeting.
President Nash, I think the safest thing to do is to post a finance committee meeting for the 14th, as well as the full city council meeting. And that will allow us to flexibility to have either of those 2 options.
That sounds good.
Here.
Very reasonable. Okay, do we have a plan?
We got a plan.
We do. We'll have to alert Laura to that plan if she's the one who's going to be posting. So I'll have to remember that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
All
Okay.
right, we'll let you all be now. Thank you. Tomorrow.
Good night,
All right,
everyone.
yep,
See you
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
Great work.
Good night.
Night.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you,
It's always
Pammy.
good to see
As
you.
always.
You too. Care.